So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the introduction. I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to address you this afternoon. I have a very interesting topic for discussion of huge contemporary relevance. My address to you is based on data and evidence, and it raises challenging issues which are often unappreciated. I'm privileged to be speaking to such an expert audience, and I'm aware that whilst it's immediately after lunch, there's lots of material to cover, so I will be moving at a fairly sporting pace. For obvious reasons, given the current climate, I will not be naming any medical practitioners in relation to clinical outcomes, which I hope you will understand. So a little bit about me. Clearly I'm British by background. I'm also an Australian citizen. I graduated in medicine from the University of Cambridge. I am a British specialist plastic and reconstructive surgeon by background, if I can get the clicker to work. There we go. And as has been indicated, I'm on the UK Specialist Register. I am a former Hunterian Professor of the Royal College of Surgeons of England, and I hold, pertinent to this talk, a specific degree in a higher degree in cosmetic surgery, which very few plastic surgeons hold. I've also undertaken a variety of clinical fellowships specifically in cosmetic surgery, and I'm a member of the International Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgery, a variety of other roles and degrees and so on, and I sit on various expert committees, including for the Department of Health. In terms of disclosures, I have no financial support from any source, and it's already been indicated in terms of registration, I'm not a fellow of the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, and in this country I practice under general registration. I'd like to be clear what I advocate for right at the very start of this talk, and I do not stand for plastic surgeons practicing cosmetic surgery simply because I am one. Similarly, I do not stand for cosmetic surgeons practicing cosmetic surgery simply because I'm president of a cosmetic surgical college. What I do stand for very much is for patients and their safety in cosmetic surgery. And it's through that prism that I approach this topic with certainly, I believe, a unique background, and I hope also a non-partisan perspective given the two statements that I've just made. In terms of a brief executive summary, so you can see where this talk is going, I'm going to touch upon the pertinent issues of cosmetic surgery and a solution to the current problems society faces. I'll cover how we got to this point, a solution that I have proposed that will both protect patients and will not favour any particular group of doctors, the evidence that backs that up, and the regulatory reform options currently before us and the risk within that of commercial monopoly formation. So let's get going just with an introduction to cosmetic surgery in this country. It's a huge industry, several billions of dollars certainly. There's been much recent publicity about dangerous practices within it, and accordingly, regulatory reform processes are underway with a view to optimizing patient safety. The revelations about the industry, however, are not new. They go back around a quarter of a century, and in 1999, the Walton Cosmetic Surgery Inquiry got underway. It recommended formation of what was then the New South Wales Cosmetic Surgery Credentialing Council, and that failed in 2003. Why? Because of the vested interests of different surgical groups. 22 years has elapsed since, and here we are again considering reform once more. And those processes that are currently underway are threefold. There's a Senate inquiry which sat late last year and is due to report later this month. There is a consultation regulation impact statement into the use of the title surgeon, and there's also an ARPA review underway into the regulation of practitioners in cosmetic surgery. So in all that time, why have we got back to exactly the same point of where we started? What's changed in the interim? Fundamentally, it's very simple, three things. Firstly, huge increase in demand. We all know about the cult of celebrity, you'll be familiar with these two faces. And with that, a variety of seductive social media claims. But perhaps most importantly, intense scrutiny. People around the world have shown the courage to speak up where wrongdoing and poor conduct is being called out. And whilst this slide depicts the Me Too movement, which is clearly an unrelated matter, the point is the same. I'd just like to touch briefly on a contextual background of surgical history. This slide covers 2,500 years, and if it runs from left to right, if you look at the four big red arrows, we start on the left, 500 BC with Hippocrates, who I've no doubt everybody's heard of here, Hippocratic Oath, morals of medicine, first do no harm, and that remains as pertinent now as it did back then. We then go through almost 2,000 years until we get to what is now, or who is now understood to be the father of scientific surgery, John Hunter, a Scotsman, and you'll recall I was a former Hunterian professor of the college in London. That's where the eponymous name comes from. It wasn't until 100 years ago that the modern form of reconstructive plastic surgery, as we know it, first emerged, and that was through the gentleman who's just disappeared from the slide, Sir Harold Gillis, a New Zealander from this neck of the woods, who went over to the UK, one of the big four plastic surgical founders. And you'll see the last arrow, the red arrow on the far right, almost off the slide, is where modern cosmetic surgery comes in. And I emphasize the word modern, so there's no dispute. But that is, in the surgical terms, that is the blink of an eye ago. And it's for that reason that despite numerous claims to the contrary, cosmetic surgery neither belongs to nor is subsumed by any given traditional surgical specialty. The training, skills and experience needed for it differ significantly from reconstructive plastic surgery. And that is often misunderstood. They are often understood to be synonymous when they're not. But it's convenient, as we'll come on to explore in a little while, for plastic surgeons to perpetuate that myth. So out of the last 250 years, 10 surgical specialties have evolved in Australia. 9 of them are for medical practitioners with specialist training delivered by the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons. I'll refer to that body as RACS from hereafter. Now, you're all familiar, I've no doubt, with some of the specialties: cardiac surgery, brain surgery, orthopaedic surgery, and so on and so forth, including plastic surgery. Now, the Australian Society of Plastic Surgeons is one of 2 surgical craft groups which states on its website that its main role is to protect the integrity of plastic surgery as a specialty. I'd now like you to look at the bottom bullet. The training programs of RACS are accredited by the Australian Medical Council, and that has been the case since about 2001. ASPS, by a collaboration agreement with RACS, has come to deliver RACS accredited training. And I would like you to hold those 2 thoughts. Firstly, that the AMC is in the independent accreditor of training, and that there are 9 specialties of RACS. Let's turn to cosmetic surgery. Now, that is not recognised at this moment in time as a specialty, and that's often misrepresented in pejorative terms, sort of a trivial, demeaning type of undertaking that is not terribly serious. And nothing could be further from the truth, which we'll explore in a little while. But because it's not recognised as a specialty, there is no protected title at law. Therefore, any medical practitioner, quite legally, may call themselves a cosmetic surgeon, whether or not they are trained in and competent in cosmetic surgery. The reality, therefore, is that cosmetic surgery is undertaken by lots of doctors of varying backgrounds, training and experience, and as in any other medical field or even profession, some are very, very good at it and some are not. However, the important point is that cosmetic surgeons are not all the same. And in that context, I'm just going to run you through the types of practitioners that practice cosmetic surgery in this country as we speak. I told you a little while ago that cosmetic surgery is not recognised as a specialty, and as it's a fairly new area of practice, it's not been a significant part of the training programmes of the established medical colleges. To fill that vacuum, the forerunner of the college I represent today, the AACSM, was established 30-odd years ago as a multidisciplinary body, general surgeons, plastic surgeons, ENT surgeons, and so on. And it includes some fellows of RACS, and it includes some fellows of my college in London, the Royal College of Surgeons of England. It's the only medical college which provides education and training leading specifically to a fellowship in cosmetic medicine and surgery. And that fellowship not only requires mandatory core surgical training, but also 2 years of dedicated cosmetic surgical training leading to a demonstration of competency. Martin, could you scroll down the slide, please? And you'll see the little icon there in the middle, which is ascribed with CanMeds, and the surgical syllabus of the college is approved by the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada as a physician competency framework, and that's the evidence of that. The second group of practitioners are RACS plastic surgeons, some of whom refer to themselves as cosmetic plastic surgeons. They undergo plastic surgical training, accredited by the AMC, and undertaken in public hospitals on Medicare-eligible caseload. There are some cosmetic surgical topics in the curriculum. Martin? There we go. Could you scroll down for me, please? There are some cosmetic surgical topics in the curriculum, but that, of course, does not necessarily equate with training or competence. And there may be an associated optional 6 months of dedicated cosmetic surgical training. The third group, a little bit of a mixed bag. So these are cosmetic surgeons who might be general practitioners, they may be other specialist surgeons, but the key point about that group is that there is no dedicated cosmetic surgical training. So why all the interest in this? And fundamentally, that's very simple. Cosmetic surgery is a unique practice, and it represents the interface of surgery and commerce. And because of that, we'll all be familiar with Venn diagrams from school days, or shaded out in the middle there, where the two intersect. But the elephant in the room in all of this are the lucrative financial incentives that are available to medical practitioners who practice in this area. I guess most of you will not know that we now have a bigger per capita spend on cosmetic surgery in Australia than we do, for example, in the United States. There are quite literally fortunes to be made and fought over in this area. And the winners are the doctors who can capture that market, and the currency, sadly, are patients. That is why everybody claims that they are the only group who are trained and competent in cosmetic surgery, and that everybody else is untrained and incompetent. And all the arguments you are now hearing in the media relating to protection of title relate to that fundamental simple truth. And it's in that light that the big danger to the public now is manipulation of the regulatory reform process to cause commercial monopoly formation. To give you an idea of the scale, this is a slide from the International Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgery from 2018, and it indicates that Australia ranks 9th in the world for the amount of cosmetic surgical procedures undertaken. There's roughly a 50-50 split between surgical and non-surgical medical procedures, and as I said earlier on, it represents a multi-billion-dollar industry. So the key question, is cosmetic surgery safely performed in Australia? Often yes, but many times no as well. And I'm going to run you through a few examples of where things have come off track. Perhaps the most tragic, 26-year-old young lady, Lauren James, who died in 2007 following cosmetic liposuction at the hands of a plastic surgeon. 2018, you may well be aware of the Cosmetic Institute, which currently represents the biggest class action in relation to cosmetic surgery. That was in this town, in Sydney, owned and run by a plastic surgeon, but incorporating a variety of cosmetic surgeons. I mentioned I wouldn't detail names, and I won't, but in 2020 there was a different cosmetic surgeon from that third group I indicated to you, no affiliation with the RACs, no affiliation with the college I represent, who was struck off following poor practice. And then most recently, probably the one you'll be most familiar with, the Four Corners programme on the ABC last October, which detailed the practice of a cosmetic surgeon who was a fellow from the college I represent. Now, just on that point, there was footage of me giving evidence to the Senate inquiry, which was spliced into that programme, but I was not interviewed directly by the ABC. The point of this slide is that it demonstrates cosmetic surgical issues are across the board. I've talked about a plastic surgeon operating a budget clinic of cosmetic surgeons, a cosmetic surgeon in their own right, and a cosmetic surgeon from the college I represent. And that simply demonstrates that the problem is across the board, and therefore the solution must be across the board also. And it's those such matters which have led to the current considerations of regulatory reform. So what is the point of that? What are we trying to do with regulatory reform? And it's fundamentally very simple: protect patients. But in order to do that, we must allow patients to identify who is trained in cosmetic surgery and is safe from who is not. The best solution by far to be able to do that would be to recognise cosmetic surgery as an independent specialty. That naturally includes a variety of safeguards, which currently the 10 recognised specialties have, but cosmetic surgery doesn't. The problem, however, is it is precluded at law at this moment in time. In order for a specialty to be recognised at all, it must treat a burden of disease, so an appendix that's burst or a bone that's broken. Cosmetic surgery is not like that. If one wishes to undergo liposuction or a breast augmentation or a facelift, clearly there is no disease involved, and that is why, under the current legislation, it cannot be recognised as a specialty. It also has the very profound implication that cosmetic surgery cannot therefore be owned by any of the traditional specialties. The solution, therefore, which I have put forward to government on behalf of the college I represent, is to use a different area of the national law which currently exists, and it's called Section 98, which I'm sure many of the lawyers will be familiar with, in which an area of practice can be endorsed. And if under that area, a national accreditation standard ensuring core surgical competence and requiring additional training and specifically competency in cosmetic surgery were included, then that would protect patients. And this sort of situation where a new area of practice has emerged over the last few decades, but not fitting the criteria of a new medical specialty, yet still requiring regulatory restriction, that situation precisely reflects exactly where we are at the moment with cosmetic surgery. If such practitioners were endorsed and then placed on an independently administered ARPRA public register only for those doctors, then the public would be protected. And that would entail restriction of the title cosmetic surgeon and also surgeon, but in the context of cosmetic surgery. The alternative, which is proposed by RACS, is simply to restrict the title surgeon. And the quote at the top of this slide is very important. Restricting that title to medical practitioners who have completed AMC-accredited specialist training in the medical specialty of surgery. In effect, that means RACS own members because, as I indicated earlier in the talk, 9 out of the 10 surgical specialties are controlled by RACS. The implication is it would also allow any RACS surgeon to promote themselves as a specialist surgeon in the context of cosmetic surgery, regardless of whether or not they have training or competence in it. And concurrently with that position, some of RACS fellows of the Australasian Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons, the second plastic surgical class group, seek to ban the title cosmetic surgeon. I'd like you to hold that thought as well, because the effect of all this would be that non-RACS practitioners who are trained and competent and safe in cosmetic surgery will be prevented from using both the title surgeon and cosmetic surgeon. That would create a monopoly which would exclude many trained experts in cosmetic surgery, but how RACS' proposal would actually protect patients is unclear. What is clear is that the resulting monopoly would not protect patients, as it would not be linked to competency and safety in cosmetic surgery directly. Now, miraculously, coincident with this regulatory reform process, there's been a variety of plastic surgical publications which have labelled other doctors as a variety of pejoratives, including the words fake and fabricated. They've also suggested that other doctors have engaged in misleading conduct and deceptive conduct, using words like deception, harm, truth, and you can see the others and read them there. The most visible iteration of that came in late 2020 when ASAPS launched a campaign which was called Know the Difference campaign, amongst which it claimed it was to educate consumers on the difference in registration status and AMC-accredited surgical training between registered and non-registered plastic surgeons. Now, I could talk to you about the flaws in that all day. Sadly, time won't allow. But what I will do is direct you to a publication from early 2021 on the ACCSM College website, which posed the rhetorical question, are plastic surgeons deceiving the public? And for those of you who are interested, I would strongly suggest that would be a useful read. The short point, however, is that numerous misrepresentations were made in that campaign, including the blatant suggestion that all doctors who are not members of ASAPS but performing cosmetic surgery are somehow fake, dishonest and untruthful, while simultaneously possibly overstating the training and competencies of plastic surgeons in cosmetic surgery, including by this image, implying that all specialist plastic surgeons are experts in every cosmetic procedure. I'd like to hold that thought in your mind as you consider the evidence I'm about to put to you regarding the reality of cosmetic surgical training and experience of plastic surgeons in Australia. And I would expect, as I'm sure you would, that any group making such claims would be quite beyond reproach particularly so given the statement at the top of this slide, which is a quote from RACS and some other associated groups, that cosmetic procedures need to be performed by a practitioner who is trained in the procedure. And with that statement, I could not be more in agreement. So, you'll recall I said the AMC is the independent standards body which has accredited RACS training since 2001. In their first report in 2002, they indicated in respect of plastic surgical training that groups other than RACS provide training in areas such as cosmetic surgery, and that the board is strongly endeavouring to maintain exposure, and that only 20 to 30% of positions at that time had some time spent in a private consulting or theatre environment. And the implication of that, of course, is that the training of plastic surgeons occurs in the public sector, whereas cosmetic surgery is in the private. So the implication of that is that 70 to 80% of training positions at that time did not have any exposure. Well, let's just say perhaps that was just a poor moment, and we were going on and they were going to get better. Sadly, 6 years later, Professor Peter Hirsch on national television made this statement. I was on the board of ASPS with respect to the training programme, and there was not one skerrick of time given to cosmetic surgery. I thought this was hypocritical, and I left them. Let me scroll forwards to 2017, until recently the most contemporary report. The AMC at that time said that there was a lack of training in cosmetic surgery. People qualified with a deficit in experience and qualified as plastic surgeons in this country with a gap in this area of practice. They recommended that RACS then find ways to, for plastic and reconstructive surgical trainees, to meet their aesthetic surgery requirement. Now, ASPS, unsurprisingly, did not find those observations to its liking, but it advocated for revisions to the draft report. The AMC refused. But in feedback to RACS, the national chairman at that time of the board expressly referred to difficulties with aesthetic surgery training, brackets AMC findings. Another year goes past, RACS reports back to the AMC in 2018, remember this is not long ago, indicating still a lack of access to aesthetic surgery and referring to measures to mitigate that lack of access. And then referring to, again, the gap in training opportunities within ASPS and their reconstructive, note that word, plastic surgery membership. A year later, much the same thing, again referred to a lack of training in aesthetic surgery and efforts to mitigate that lack of training. Now, I find it hard to imagine that ASAPS would not have been aware of what the AMC had to say about cosmetic surgical training of plastic surgeons in Australia since the issue was first raised in its 2002 report. And it's evident that simply RACS have been unable to fix that problem across 2 decades. Their most recent report, this is just hot off the press, it's dated November 21, but it was just published a few weeks ago, is conspicuously silent about any robust, dedicated cosmetic surgical training and experience for plastic surgical trainees. It shows little has changed and appears to attempt simply to reconfigure data. For example, surveying exposure to aesthetic procedures during rotations, remembering those rotations are in public hospitals where cosmetic surgery is not performed, and meetings and conferences, which frankly do not represent the traditional apprenticeship model of proper surgical training to which I referred earlier. So rather than being misleading and deceptive in relation to other groups, I prefer to convey to you the truth. And the truth is simply that the AMC in its reports over the last 2 decades has provided not one word of evidence of cosmetic surgery training by RACS in the 8 specialty training programs outside of plastic and reconstructive surgery. Within the 9th specialty, plastic surgery, the AMC reports since 2002 suggest inadequate surgical training. Now, whilst I know that many plastic surgeons in Australia are competent and safely perform cosmetic surgery, the evidence demonstrates that that's not merely because they've qualified as AMC specialist surgeons, but likely from subsequent training and experience. And fundamentally, that's because cosmetic surgery falls outside of the reconstructive plastic surgical training in public hospitals where cosmetic procedures are not performed. This is a similar situation across the Western world. The General Medical Council in the UK recently confirmed that there is no common qualification available for those performing cosmetic surgical procedures, and accordingly the AMC's findings in this country are hardly surprising. Now, I have to be clear here, there's absolutely nothing wrong with not having adequate training and competence in cosmetic surgery. What is wrong is misleading the public by suggesting that AMC-accredited training produces competence in cosmetic surgery, and whilst everybody else is a fake. And that, while simultaneously arguing that regulatory reform by isolated title restriction is the only way to protect the public, when conveniently that would also deliver a commercial monopoly. Late last year, in October, Robert Sheen, the president of ASAPS, was quoted by the Sydney Morning Herald as having said in relation to other doctors, just make them fess up about what they really are. And in light of the evidence I've just detailed to you, I'll leave you as the audience to reflect upon the extraordinary irony exemplified by that statement. So we just discussed at length the training of surgeons. What other outcomes can we look at in terms of cosmetic surgery? And some come from the medical defence organisations, and some data comes from the regulators, AHPRA and others. And I'd like to give you two examples spanning a decade. The first from 2012. This is a publication in one of the plastic surgical journals by Professor Bismarck, who I believe is somewhere in the audience today. It was a study with Melbourne University Public School of Health, Avant, and the Victorian Health Services Commissioner. And over a 6-year period, it looked at almost 500 informed consent disputes. There were 77 cosmetic procedures, and in nearly 2/3 of those, the practitioner against whom the allegation was made was a plastic surgeon. Coming right up to date, in terms of the Senate inquiry of last year, AHPRA submitted data to that inquiry, which demonstrated that in the 3 years to June 2021, it received 313 complaints relating to cosmetic procedures. Of the 183 practitioners who were the subject of a complaint relating to cosmetic surgery, more than half, 52%, were AMC-accredited specialist surgeons. And of that group, 71% were specialist plastic surgeons. So that really means that we now have to stop and think, and do so very, very carefully. The disadvantages of creating an effective regulated monopoly in cosmetic surgery at the behest of those whom would benefit from it most would require exceptional evidence of commensurate public interest. That evidence clearly does not exist. RACs have also proposed isolated title restriction. That already has a precedent, an existing precedent of failure in this country, in Queensland from the early 2000s. It did not protect patients, but instead reportedly tied up the regulators through numerous vexatious complaints resulting about title restriction made by one practitioner against another. And it will not protect patients because it will not allow them to identify which surgeons are trained and competent in cosmetic surgery from those who are not. And worse, far worse, it may give false reassurance to patients that simply because they are seeing a surgeon who has a restricted title surgeon, the implication may be that he or she is trained and competent in cosmetic surgery, when of course that may not be so. I'd like to quote from Churchill about 70 years ago when he spoke in London to the British Parliament, and he said, "Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." I'm sure you're all familiar with that quote. And I fear, I have concern that we're on that trajectory once again. And to illustrate that, I go back to the tragic example of Lauren James, the young lady, 26-year-old, who died in 2007. To my knowledge, the plastic surgeon who undertook her procedure is the only doctor to date who's had a finding of culpability in a death of a patient in relation to practice of a cosmetic procedure. The coroner observed afterwards that there was a specific need for training and experience in performing such a procedure, and VCAT shortly afterwards required the plastic surgeon to complete further education. Put that another way, adopting RAC's current proposals to protect the public, to restrict the title surgeon to holders only of specialist surgical registration without linking that to accreditation specifically in cosmetic surgery would not have saved Lauren James' life. In the alternative, adopting the endorsement proposal that I have put forward to government and regulators likely would have saved her. And relevantly, it would also have protected the public from the practice of the cosmetic surgeon and former fellow of the college I represent that was highlighted on Four Corners last year. In my view, doctors who are trained, competent and safe in cosmetic surgery have absolutely nothing to fear from the endorsement model that I've proposed. But there are two likely groups who may do so. Medical practitioners of cosmetic surgery who do not meet the accreditation standard. And that's a good thing. They should fear it because they wouldn't meet the grade and therefore the public would be protected. But also medical practitioners or their craft group representatives who seek to achieve a commercial monopoly by manipulating the current regulatory reform process to eliminate competent professional competitors. So I said I would be non-partisan at the beginning of this talk, and I intend to do just that. What about non-RACS cosmetic surgeons? It's unarguable that they exist, and many are inadequately trained and irresponsible, and they're a danger to the public. That danger is exacerbated by their ability currently to use the title cosmetic surgeon. But as I've indicated, not all cosmetic surgeons are the same. And in the same way that not all plastic surgeons are performing liposuction are dangerous, not all cosmetic surgeons are inadequately trained or irresponsible. That's reflected by the data, by a comment rather, from Dr. Anne Tonkin, who's with us in the audience today, after publication of the ARPA data last year. And she was saying that the cowboy reputation of cosmetic surgeons was not reflected in the data, and that complaints around cosmetic surgical procedures were spread evenly amongst cosmetic surgeons, plastic surgeons, and other specialties. So there was no simple dichotomy between bad cosmetic surgeons and good plastic surgeons. And it's clear that the evidence proves that adverse avoidable outcomes occur from both plastic surgeons and cosmetic surgeons who may have no training or inadequate training in cosmetic surgery. That assessment leads directly to support the solution which I have advocated to government for a national competency-based accreditation standard for all doctors performing cosmetic surgery. It would apply to me, it would apply to the next guy who's a general surgeon, it would apply to a plastic surgeon. Everybody who performs this should be subject to it. If those doctors were then endorsed under Section 98 of the national law as it stands and entered onto a public register independently administered by ARPA with a restricted title accordingly, either cosmetic surgeon or surgeon in the context of cosmetic surgery, then the public would be protected. No competent practitioner would be disadvantaged and no commercial monopoly would be granted to any particular group of doctors. The public would, of course, then benefit from competition, and as in any other walk of life, between safe practitioners based on competence, price and service. Now, I presented this solution in the media, where it was considered sensible by all listeners. Yet plastic surgeons have attempted to shut me up as a consequence of the very same information that I have presented to you this afternoon. I've been the subject of multiple legal threats from ASPs and ASAPs, also made in conjunction with multiple ARPA notifications or complaints, all of which were dismissed at a preliminary stage, including on the basis of either being frivolous, vexatious, misconceived, or lacking in substance. And I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions about that because I expect to get a few more after this talk. My particular favourite, however, is this. I have my own section on ASP's website and a great big foghorn in the middle and a response to comments that I made on the television last year. At the end of that statement, if you go to look on the website, at the end of that statement it says, ASPS wishes to make clear that registered plastic surgeons who have completed accredited specialist surgical training from RACS are appropriately qualified to perform cosmetic and aesthetic surgery. And in light of all the evidence I presented to you this afternoon, again, I invite you to make up your own minds about the veracity of that statement. So, as I come to or draw to a close, it's clear regulation of cosmetic surgery is urgently needed in this country. There's no dispute about that. Plastic surgical groups oppose the solution of a competency-based standard with endorsement and a public register for all doctors engaged in it. It's a solution that will protect patients and it will also be fair to doctors. And quite frankly, it's staring us in the face. However, extraordinarily, that solution has been omitted from the consultation regulation impact statement currently released by the Victorian Department of Health. The public are therefore unable to consider it. And in effect, they can only consider RAC's proposal for its isolated title restriction, which we know not only has a precedent of failure, but will neither fix the problem nor save life nor limb. Plastic surgeons have declined the opportunity to debate with me, one-on-one, live, in public, to any arena. But if RACs and AS or ASAPs genuinely desire the best outcome to protect patients, why would they object to such an endorsement model with an independently administered register to ensure that all doctors practicing cosmetic surgery are competent and safe? And I leave you with this thought. Until they submit the basis and the evidence for their objections to public scrutiny, the perception will remain that protection of patients runs second to the protection of surgeons' interests in a multi-billion-dollar cosmetic surgical industry. And with that, I invite any questions, and I thank you very much for your attention.